Hey everyone! Now that I've beaten the DLC, I'd like to talk a bit more about it, and also address some real issues that I faced while playing it. First, let me start by saying what is not an issue: the difficulty. Sure, it is very challenging, but nothing that we haven't faced previously. This might be a hot take, but if you use the DLC scaling properly, I really do not think the bosses are that much harder than most of the harder ones in the main game. Except perhaps the final boss. But even they are not unfair in any capacity. But I do understand why people are frustrated and why they think the DLC is too hard, even though I completely disagree. Shadow of the Erdtree is an extent of the endgame of Elden Ring, and the majority of players didn't reach that level of content in the base game. So it's only natural that they were not prepared for a DLC that's basically unfamiliar territory to anyone who stopped playing during or before laying down or something like that. A similar thing happened with Doom Eternal's first DLC, where people complained it was too hard, but in reality, they were just not familiar with the endgame experience, at least not enough to be comfortable with what the DLC expects from you as a player. These same players probably haven't touched the game for more than a year at this point, which also doesn't help them. Kinda hard to expect them to be the first mini-boss if they barely remember how to control their character. But the hard truth is, that is not a DLC issue. Anyway, with that said, I do think this is one of From Software's masterpieces. It really hits mostly everything that was expected from this game, and it kinda feels like a mini version of the base game in a way. You start on a new zone, with new maps to explore, and at a scaling level 0 per se, and you need to pick up Shadow Tree, Skibidi Tree, whoever, whatever, fragments to improve your character, rather than just leveling up. And I must say, this new scaling system was a genius idea. While it might not be perfect, since it removes some agency from the player, it's a great way to make sure you have a good experience in the DLC no matter what level you were in the base game. Had they only increased the power and leveling of everything, the base game would have been power crapped, and stuff from the base game would in turn become somewhat irrelevant when compared to what the DLC has to offer. Everyone who played Dark Souls 1 before and after DLC can confirm this. You're free to use whatever you wanted in PvP or in the rest of the game, but Pursuers and Black Flame were just straight up better than almost anything else the game could give you in terms of damaging spells. And not just that, if the DLC was balanced around, say, level 200, players who were at or above level 300 or so would basically trivialize all the content. And that just wouldn't be a good design for a Souls game. You are expected to struggle. It's a core concept of the genre as a whole at this point. And it's what makes your eventual triumph through the bosses all the more rewarding. So overall, when it comes to the exploration, the design of the areas and the boss fights in general, I'd say this DLC is a solid 9 out of 10. Possibly the best DLC from Soft ever made, but not quite perfect. It is important to mention though that it really doesn't make sense to compare it too much with other great DLCs like the Ringed City or the Old Hunters, because really Elden Ring is such a different game from from Bloodborne or Dark Souls 3. For one, they are much more linear and they are kind of like a string of regular dungeons than just a map to explore. So it's really a different ballpark. It's not worth comparing. But if you just wanna compare satisfaction for completing it alone, like as a guide, then you could maybe compare all of them. And if I would do that, probably would be like one of the best for sure. The thing is, it's not quite perfect. I do have a couple of real issues with the DLC as a whole. And just so you know, I'm about to get into minor spoilers from here on out. While I'll try to keep it to a minimum, here is your mandatory spoiler warning in case you would like to do a blind playthrough later on. Like, you have been warned, that's all I mean. The first issue that I have is the amount of empty space in some of the zones, like the Cerulean Coast or Scattered Tree Base. Aside from an optional small dungeon, a mausoleum and a boss, that's pretty much nothing in them. Which is kinda weird, because it takes away the fun of exploring, at least for me. Maybe they could have made these zones smaller or used their space better. This is all in contrast to zones like Abyssal Woods, which, while also a bit empty, they were amazing to explore because of how unique they were structured, how involved they were in their own lore, or some of its unique mechanics. I mean, would it be too hard to integrate the boss from Erdtree base into Abyssal Woods? Or maybe add just one more thing there, aside from the boss fight? I mean, come on. Even Radahn's boss fight in the base game has something there. Like there's a catacomb hidden in the very far away in the area. So even that has something. Like why would that be impossible to do something with the Erdtree base in the DLC? I don't know. Even the ruins of Raw was just a nothing burger of a zone, kinda. Sure, it has some of the more important main quest moments, alright, but that's pretty much it. At least the Finger Ruins had some lore implications, you know, regarding a side plot, right? But even those zones could have, I don't know, maybe even just a mini boss or something, like anything. Anyway, finding out that some of those zones were pretty much empty was kind of one of the lower points of the DLC for me. And the other issue I'd say is how over the top these fights are becoming over time. I mean, if you look at the final boss, there are some moments where you can barely see its attacks due to the huge light show happening all over the place. The same can be said about the dragon boss, although in a smaller scale. And even the first boss, the lion that we've seen in the trailers, can be a nightmare to fight with short-range melee weapons, due to how much clutter there is on the screen at times, and how much he makes your camera move around. Not to say I didn't like these fights. Truth be told, aside from Pretester Knight, I think all fights in the DLC are pretty great. Some even reach my personal top 10 fights of the whole series. But the way they are going all over the top, where does it end? If we continue like this, they might as well ditch Miyazaki and hire Michael Bay as a director for the next Souls game, like straight up. There are other over-the-top fights in the series, like Gale, Malenian, and Ivory King, but at least the visual clutter is set to an acceptable level, and you can clearly see what's going on at all times. I love crazy bullshit, don't get me wrong, but there's a limit. And this might even be tied to the performance issue some player mentioned. I personally had no problems with performance, but I can see how that could have been an issue for PC players. Anyway, those are my 2 cents on the DLC. It was amazing. I'll definitely play it again a few times, but it definitely wasn't perfect. I guess I just wanted to add an opinion that most people are not talking about that much. And I realize this is a subjective take, that probably some people will disagree, and that's okay. I'd love to hear about your opinions in the comments. Thank you for listening to the ramblings of the Souls veteran, but if you also love this game and the series as a whole, you understand why I wanted to talk about this. That's it. I hope you all have a great day and that you have as much fun as I had in the Realm of Shadow.